Welcome to the replay. My name is Miguel Benitez, and I'm, as usual, here helping you on your search for thoughtful Christianity. This is only the second time that I've gone live on my channel, so it's not something I do too often, but it's something that I want to start doing a little bit more, and I don't know exactly what that's going to look like yet, but seeing live streams do quite well for other channels in other areas of interest of mine, and the kinds of community that it builds. And as an educator, I just really enjoy having conversations with people. And so I thought if I could somehow bring you guys into the conversation, the people who are watching would benefit even greater. And so here I am just trying this out. So what I'll do anytime that I do go live now or even in the future is I'm going to bring something to the table to talk about. I don't know how many of you will show up, if anyone at all, and that's okay. So I've got something on my mind that I want to talk about. I have something ready that I want to talk about, but at the same time, I want to be open. And so if anybody comes on and has any questions, I'm certainly opening to fielding those and having the conversation take a different turn if that's what you guys want. So today, and I will put this in the description, I want to talk about an opinion piece that was published online by the New York Times entitled "Easter is Calling Me Back to the Church." And it's by Margaret Renkel. It was published yesterday, March 25th, 2018. And I wanted to just make some comments because as I heard about the let me just go ahead and there we go. As I heard what she was saying as I was reading the opinion piece, I ended up being kind of captured by what she was saying. Welcome, JMD Apologetics. And yes, what is the best evidence for the resurrection? And I will certainly go ahead and tackle that in a moment. And actually, I don't know if you've noticed, I started today. Each day during Holy Week, I'll be publishing a video with one line of evidence for the resurrection of Christ. And so I started today. So be sure to check that video out. And they're short videos that I'm doing. I think today's was about 4 minutes long. And today's was the fact that Paul put so much weight on a resurrection claim, right? Why put all of Christianity on a historical event? All Paul had to do to take the pressure off is say that Jesus rose from the dead spiritually. But why claim a bodily, physical resurrection when you know that can completely make the entire Christian worldview, the entire Christian religion crumble, right? And so that's just one line of evidence. I'll be sharing a number of different evidences. Hey, Nick from Magical News Live, thank you for dropping by. And so as I'm reading this article, this opinion piece in the New York Times, I'm just going to read a small part of it here. It says, "In this house, we have never been Christmas and Easter only Christians. My husband and I grew up in the church and raised our children there. Even during the hardest years when mobilizing 3 young sons and various configurations of elderly parents felt like running an Iditarod every Sunday morning, even then, we didn't miss Mass." And what she had been sharing is how last year Easter was the only Sunday that she made it to church. And she was saying that she didn't grow up that way, right? She had grown up in the Roman Catholic Church. Her husband had grown up that way. And so they hadn't raised their children that way. They had decided to go to the church every single week. And yet it was in 2016 when she chose to step away from the church. And this is what she writes. She says, "But the 2016 presidential election changed all that for me. I just couldn't forgive my fellow Christians for electing a man who exploited his employees, boasted about his sexual assaults, encouraged violence against citizens who disagreed with him, mocked the disabled, and welcomed the support of virulent white supremacists. This is what Jesus meant when he told his followers to love one another. And so I thought it was interesting to hear that perspective, right? She's obviously referring to Donald Trump as our president, and she's discussing just the challenges that posed for her, seeing so many Christians support him in 2016. And she said that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. And she makes it clear in this article that this is not the first issue that she took with Christianity or the church, but this was kind of the camel that broke the straw that broke the camel's back. And so as I was reading this, I felt for the author, because it was in 2016 that I think a lot of my ideas started to change. A lot of my frustrations came to the surface towards Christianity in America in particular. And yet, it is because of the direction that so many took, like Margaret, to leave the church pretty much altogether, or to embrace a liberal form of theology in Christianity. I just don't think that is our only other option. You see, I think that what has happened is, for many, the negative aspects of fundamentalism in the church have just grown wearisome, have grown tiresome, and have increasingly become clear as inconsistent with biblical Christianity. But as I talked about in my interview with Don Williams, be sure to check that interview out in my archive. We talked about fundamentalism in America, and to throw out all of fundamentalism is to throw out some of the very fundamentals of the faith. And so that was really why I started this channel in the first place, because I shared the frustration of so many of my brothers and sisters with the idea that the church was supporting a person like Donald Trump. That character did not matter to most of my Christian friends and family members, or it didn't matter enough to keep them from voting for him. Pragmatism seemed to win the day, and I wasn't ready. I wasn't willing to give in to pragmatism. I'm still not willing. And yet, I wanted to reject where I saw so many going, which is to liberal Christianity. And I don't mean politically, I mean theologically. Believing that theological liberalism was where they would find answers, was where they would find a religion that was fulfilling, a religion that could handle their tough questions. And I firmly believe that there is a third way, that there's a way in which we can think carefully, wrestle over big ideas, reject the negative aspects of fundamentalism while still embracing the fundamentals themselves. Margaret went on to say, I was supposed to be thinking about the infinite love of a merciful God, but all I could hear when she was in church were thousands of Christians shouting, "Build that wall." She said later on, during college and graduate school, I tried to talk myself out of believing in God. The reason not to believe were multifarious and convincing. The reasons to believe came down to only one. I couldn't not believe. I seem to have been born with a constant ache for the sacred, a deep-rooted need to offer thanks, to ask for help, to sing out to fathomless praise to something. In time, I found my way back to God, the most familiar and fundamental something I knew, even if by then my conception of the divine had enlarged beyond any church's ability to define it or contain it. And what I want to suggest to Margaret and to others who are sharing in her frustration and her pain with the church is that, yes, those longings are inherent. We as human beings, right? It's very natural for us to ask questions about meaning and purpose, about value. It's very inherent in human beings to want to give thanks. In fact, one of the greatest catastrophes for humankind is to wake up in the morning and not have anyone to give thanks to. And I think that these things are inherent in us because as human beings, we are all made in the image of God. But I think that it's important to recognize that that imago Dei, that image of God in which we're made, points us to a specific creator in whose image we've been made. And I think it's important for us to recognize that God has made us in a particular way and has demanded a particular life from us. We don't get to decide what the rules are. We don't get to decide what is right and wrong. Right and wrong, the very basis for which are found in God's very nature. And so I think that it's important for us to recognize Margaret's frustration, right? I completely get that frustration. Right? This frustration with the church in supporting and giving into more American culture rather than biblical Christianity. I get that. But the answer is not to reject the fundamentals of Scripture. The answer is not to reject the good parts, the important parts of fundamentalism, but rather its excess. JMD Apologetics, absolutely, man. I would love to be on sometime. I would love to be able to chat with you. So absolutely, let's connect. Let's do that. And so as I think about why I made this channel, it's for people like Margaret. It's for people like Margaret who are frustrated, who are tired of this, and who are tempted to embrace liberal theology. Liberal theology is ultimately empty. Right? Because when we get to decide who God is, right? When we start making God in our image instead of us being made in his, then who is ultimately God in that system? We are. We are. Because we get to define what God is like. And I don't think it's a coincidence that God in those systems ends up really, really looking a whole lot like we do. You see, the reality is that in a world that is fallen, with people who have a sin nature, wouldn't we expect that a holy, just, and perfect God will demand certain things of us that we don't like, that we don't really care for? It seems to me that follows. That absolutely, there's going to be all kinds of things that a perfect and holy God would want of us, would desire of us, would command us to do that we're not going to like as sinners, as people who are in rebellion against him. Her last paragraph, she writes, "So I will be at Mass again on Easter morning, as I have been on almost every Easter morning of my life. I will wear white and remember the ones I loved who sat beside me in the pew and whose participation in the eternal has found another form, whatever it turns out to be. I will lift my voice in song and give thanks for my life. I will pray for my church and my country, especially the people my church and my country are failing. And then I will walk into the world and do my best to practice resurrection." And so my words to Margaret would be, that sounds great. But you see, The problem with resurrection is that assumes there was death. And I agree, Margaret. You were dead, and I was dead. And we are dead in our trespasses and sins. And in order to be resurrected to life, we need a God to do that. And if God has brought us back to life, as you claim that you've been brought back to life, spiritual resurrection has taken place in your life. If that is true, then does not the God who has brought you back to life have authority over that life? And so I think that it's important that we recognize, as we do go into Easter, that God has given us life. He absolutely has given us life. And I think that it's important for us to recognize that God does command us on how we ought to live in light of the resurrection. Right? The same power that rose Jesus from the dead has risen us from the dead and will raise us up physically from the dead. And so we should be living a life that is consistent with that. So in light of Easter coming up on Sunday, every day this week, I'm releasing a video in which I will be offering a number of evidences, one evidence per day of the week, all the way up to Sunday, for the historicity of the resurrection of Christ. And so in the chat earlier, JMD Apologetics 101, who has a channel dedicated to apologetics, he has a number of people on there. And so I would certainly encourage you to check out his channel. That he does interviews with a number of different folks on there, some other great YouTubers as well. So be sure to check out JMD Apologetics 101's channel. And so he asked, what is the best evidence for the resurrection of Jesus? And this is a little bit of a preview of what I'll be covering down this week. But what I would say is that it's the earliest claim of what happened to Jesus. Okay, 1 Corinthians 15 contains within it a creed that can be dated anywhere from 2 to 5 years of the resurrection. When we're talking about ancient history, that's like a news flash. That's like a tweet on Twitter, right? I mean, that is as early and as close as you can hope to have it be. And so, being that was the earliest claim, right? On top of that, you have the empty tomb, right? The tomb was empty, and I'll give some further evidence for that in one of my videos coming up this week. Combined with the fact that the best non-supernatural explanation, I think, fails miserably. And that is the hallucination hypothesis. It's the most popular explanation by skeptics today, wanting to attribute the experiences that the apostles had as they witnessed the resurrection of Christ. They witnessed the resurrected Christ, rather. They didn't witness the event itself. Basically, the hallucination hypothesis fails. It fails tremendously because it fails to account for the empty tomb, but it also fails to account with what we know about modern psychology, right? Hallucinations, rather, are extremely rare and are individual. Mike Licona, who was actually one of my professors at Biola University, he actually talks about how when it comes to hallucinations, it's kind of like a dream, right? And so let's say that I went to bed this evening and I'm having a dream about being in Hawaii, right? I can't wake up in the middle of the night, wake up my wife and say, hey, join me in this dream of mine so that we can have a free vacation in Hawaii, right? Dreams are individual things. And so I think that the evidence against the hallucination hypothesis is very strong, and I believe that is the best explanation that skeptics have come up with. The explanation that deals with the most of the historical data, the earliest historical data that we have, is that Jesus bodily rose from the dead. And some, even non-Christians, have come to that conclusion. For example, Pinchas Lapid, who has already passed away, but he was a Jewish scholar, he acknowledged, he said, look, I've done the historical investigation. It does seem to me that Jesus bodily rose from the dead. Now, Pinchas Lapid did not become a Christian. He believed that Jesus had come for the Gentiles, but nevertheless, he acknowledged the historical evidence was strong. And so again, I think there's a number of lines of evidence that will that do in fact point to the fact that Jesus rose bodily from the dead. Some people believe they all hallucinated the same thing. Yeah, Love Family. That is the most popular skeptical claim that we have being kind of touted today. And yeah, it's interesting because if you understand hallucinations, you get into a situation where, hallucinations by themselves are extremely rare. Okay. Then when you're talking about visual hallucinations, they're extremely rare. Auditory hallucinations are extremely rare. Having a visual and an auditory hallucination is even more rare because that's two hallucinations happening simultaneously. Not that they never happen, but they're very rare. So, and then you've got the idea that multiple people are reporting the same thing. So what you have is hallucination and hallucination and hallucination. So we start stacking up the odds here. And really, the atheist, the skeptic, has to almost buy into miracle after miracle after miracle after miracle, as opposed to just acknowledging the one that makes sense of all of the data, which is that Jesus bodily rose from the dead. And again, I'll be laying out more of that in my videos throughout this week, throughout Holy Week, as we look forward to Easter Sunday, in which we celebrate the resurrection of Christ. So, JMD, that's kind of my quick version of that. I think it's the failure of the hallucination hypothesis coupled with some of that additional data that I mentioned. Exactly, Love Family. Yeah, if everybody's hallucinating the same thing at the same time, that seems miraculous because we certainly haven't seen that in any kind of study regarding hallucinations. Yeah. In fact, one of the kind of leading books on hallucinations came out in 2010, so about 8 years ago. And when Mike Lacona, my professor, who did his dissertation on the resurrection, when he reached out to them and asked them, why didn't you include anything about group hallucinations? He said, because there's no data on them. They couldn't include a chapter on group hallucinations because they just don't, there's no data that they do actually happen. So, and again, even if we're talking about suggestion, manipulation and brainwashing and all that, keep in mind that we're not just talking about the disciples of Jesus. We're talking about skeptics and enemies of Christianity too. So you've got somebody like Saul, right, who converts to Christianity from a life of persecuting Christianity. And if you ask him why, it's because he saw the resurrected Christ. And he felt so strongly about this. He was willing to put all of Christianity on this particular historical fact. And that's what my video that I published earlier today is the fact that this is a foolish move by Paul if he didn't actually believe that Jesus rose from the dead. Because, again, he could have easily spread Christianity without putting so much of a burden on Christianity. The moment Paul indicated that if Christ is not risen from the dead, we should be pitied, right? That our faith is futile. He connected Christianity to history forever. And if that historical event did not happen, then Christianity is false. And yet Paul gives us several lines of evidence that it was in fact true. Hey, works hard. Thanks for dropping by. Okay. Yeah, and JMD, I don't know if you're still around. A Disney Life for Me. She dropped my email address in the chat there, so definitely feel free to reach out, and we can work something out to collaborate. All right, and so unless I have any other questions come up in the chat, really what I wanted to kind of point out was I thought this connected both with the week that we're in, this opinion piece. And again, I'll put the link to the opinion piece in the description after the live stream. It's called Easter's Calling Me Back to the Church. And I just want to say to people like Margaret, people who are frustrated with some of the aspects of Christianity that they're seeing in America, some of the aspects of the American culture that Christians have kind of made Christianity itself. There is a third way. Liberal theology, liberal Christianity that ultimately rejects the true teachings of Christ are empty, and that's not the answer. There is a third way that you can go. There is a third way in which you can embrace the fundamentals of Christianity, embrace the key teachings of Christ, and reject where culture has kind of driven us astray. JMD wants to know if I am a 5-point Calvinist. So JMD, what I would say is yes, I am. But what I was talking about earlier regarding spiritual resurrection, even is just a biblical idea. I think even non-Calvinists would agree with that. I'm not talking about inability or anything like that at this moment. I'm just talking about from spiritual death to spiritual life, whatever that may look like. So, but yes, I am. All right. All right, guys. Well, unless there's anything else, again, I want to encourage you, take this Holy Week, regardless of where you are at in this journey, regardless of what it is that you think about Jesus, regardless of what your relationship with him might be. I would encourage you to be thinking about the significance of the claims that Jesus made and the significance of the claims of his disciples, right? The disciples went on to, they went from disappointed and just failed disciples to these men of God that went on to preach this message and spread the gospel throughout the whole world. And so I would encourage you to consider the claims of Christ and consider the historical evidence for the resurrection. And like I said, I'll be sharing that throughout this week. JMD, I've got a number of friends that are Molinists. I have a number of professors that are Molinists. I appreciate Molinism as an attempt to try and reconcile free will and God's sovereignty. And so it's not the position that I hold, but certainly I have many brothers that I care deeply for that are Molinists. Hey, Arjons, thanks for dropping by. I appreciate it. All right, guys. Well, we are just about a minute and a half or so out from 10 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. But thank you so much for showing up. I would love to hear from you guys. If you have any questions or things you'd like for me to tackle in the future, I definitely want to hear from you. And so be looking out. I'm going to try out a few different ways, a few different times of going live. And so I'd love to be able to further engage with you guys in the future. Again, be looking out for the videos that I'm dropping daily this week. And be sure to hit the like button and subscribe if you're not already subscribed to the channel. All right. God bless, guys.